Welcome to today's upload. Today we're looking at Blood Brothers and we're going to have a quick look through the characters, a who's who in the play Blood Brothers. In other uploads you will be able to look at the social and historical cultural context. This context is what's needed in many of our Gcse answers. Very similar to English language and English literature, especially the English literature when we have to include context. There will also be uploads on themes and how and which characters link to which themes. There is also uploads with exam questions, sample exam questions, how to answer the exam questions, and of course the plot. What is the plot to Blood Brothers? There will also be uploads on other texts, including the English literature texts and several Gcse texts. But today, the characters Blood Brothers and the who's who. So a list of the characters, as we can see here. These are the characters: Edward, Mickey, Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Lyons, Sammy, Linda, narrator, the milkman, the doctor, the gynecologist, the debt collectors, the policeman, the bus conductor, the teachers. It's a relatively small cast, and if you are lucky enough to see Blood Brothers live or watch recordings of Blood Brothers, you'll notice that many of the smaller characters are usually played by the same actors. Firstly, Edward. The play is centered around the two twins, Mickey and Edward. Edward is one of the twins. He's brought up in a higher class. He's a middle class person. Mrs. Lyons takes him to be her own. He's well educated and represents the privileged lifestyle. He's good natured and he's fun loving. His twin Mickey is a lower class character. He's funny, he's honest. He's a cheeky chappy kind of character. Later in Act 2, Linda becomes pregnant to Mickey. We learn that he works in a factory and that he loses his job. He becomes dependent on medication and antidepressants. And at the end of the play, he kills Edward when he finds out about an affair with Linda. Mrs. Johnson. She is the real mother to Edward, Mickey, Sammy, and another character, Donna Marie. She's a working class character. She struggles to pay the bills. She's a single parent. We learn at the very beginning in the Marilyn Monroe song that she comes across as quite gullible. She's easily manipulated. Her husband says she dances like Marilyn Monroe. She reminds him of Marilyn Monroe and she falls for it. Later in the song we find out that she no longer looks like Marilyn Monroe. She's got children and her husband leaves her for somebody else who looks like Marilyn Monroe. The Marilyn Monroe theme will be mentioned in the upload on themes when we start talking about the cultural and the contextual. Mrs. Lyons manipulates Mrs. Johnson. She works as a cleaner for Mrs. Lyons. In Act 2 she becomes a much stronger character. She's less likely to be manipulated. There's one of the scenes when Mrs. Lyons finds Mrs. Johnson and she comes into the kitchen. Mrs. Johnson stands up. She stands up for herself and she stands up for her children and her beliefs. She becomes a much stronger character. She never gets over giving Edward away. Towards the end of Act 1 she gives Edward a locket, a bracelet to remember him when he tells her that he's moving away. There's a clear love and connection between Mrs. Johnson and all her children. Mrs. Lyons is a complete contrast to Mrs. Johnson. The classes, she's a middle class character whereas Mrs. Johnson's a working class. Mrs. Lyons uses money to get her own way. She offers Mrs. Johnson money to pay for one of the twins, the child. She manipulates people. Mrs. Lyons is the manipulator. She uses power and money and a class system to get where she wants. However, she later struggles to cope with the fact Edward is not her real son. She becomes paranoid and suspicious. There's a constant theme of paranoia. Where has Edward been? Who's he been playing with? Who's he been talking to? Mrs. Lyons comes across as paranoid and suspicious. Towards the end, she is the one that plants the seed of suspicion into a very vulnerable Mickey. We've already learned that Mickey is dependent on antidepressants. He's lost his job. He's not in a good mental place. Mrs. Lyons comes across and tells him that Linda is with Edward. Sammy is the older brother of Mickey. He's Mickey's idol. We have that brilliant monologue, "I wish I was our Sammy." Sammy seems to have an obsession in guns. He's always playing with guns. There's the cowboy scenes early on in Act 1 when they're all playing. Sammy always seems to get himself in trouble. Towards the end, he becomes involved in crime. He ends up getting in trouble for trying to rob the bus. He tries to take the money out of the bus and he pulls out a gun. Linda is a childhood friend to Mickey and Edward. Both boys fall in love with Linda. She starts with a crush on Mickey in Act 1, but towards the end, when Mickey's having his bad times and is in a bad place, she turns to Edward for support. The narrator, throughout the play, tells parts of the story. He's an omniscient narrator. Omniscient, the all-knowing, the godlike character who sees and knows everything. He is an omniscient narrator. He's always on stage. He's always watching the action. Kind of might remind you of kind of Grim Reaper kind of character. God, in control and watching. On several occasions in the play, he interacts with characters. It could be as a passerby in the street scene. He constantly pushes the themes of fate and supernatural. He emphasizes throughout the play the bad decisions made, the putting the shoes on the table. He talks about fate a lot until the end, when he changes and he finally blames all the problems to social class and society. There are a number of smaller parts in Blood Brothers, and the small parts link heavily to the themes and Willie Russell's objectives, what he wanted the audience to get from the play, the messages he wanted to send, which we will look at in the next videos on themes. The milkman, very early on, very short scene, he threatens Mrs. Johnson because she can't pay the milk. He says he'll stop the milk. Mrs. Johnson says she needs the milk, she needs to provide for her family, but she's got no money. The milkman, no money, no milk. The doctor, the gynecologist, he tells Mrs. Johnson she is pregnant with twins. We also have several characters like people selling the catalogue, the finance man. These characters, although they're only in brief moments, show the aspect of the cultural context, the ease of how easy it is to buy now, pay later, the increasing debt for the working class. The policeman, who's a supposedly figure of trust in society, but he shows a contrast in how he deals with different class. Early on in Act 1, Mickey and Edward get into trouble. The policeman, how he deals with Mickey is very harsh, very sharp, very to the point. He talks down to Mrs. Johnson, yet when he visits Mrs. Lyons, he's impressed with the wealth. He says it's okay with Edward. It's just part of growing up, part of being a boy. However, it wasn't the same story with Mickey. So he's there to show the contrast of how people deal and how people relate with different classes. The bus conductor, not afraid to question Sammy. On the bus, Sammy, Mickey and Linda don't have the correct money to pay for the bus. He challenges them. The teachers, like the policemen, trusted members of society, but Russell, with a double L, Russell should be there, utilises these roles to show the difference in education between the social class of Mickey and Edward. We see the scene when Mickey is in school and he doesn't understand the point of the questions. What is the purpose of education to his life? Whereas the teacher in Edward's scene shows Edward's education, the middle class education, the importance of education to do well in life. There's a clear contrast there. These are the characters in Blood Brothers.